Hi! On the Woodpecker this time, I will show you how I did my new router cabinet. Since I changed my table saw, I don't have any support at the outfeed of the table. Before, I was using my router table as an outfeed table, but now it's too high. So I'm taking this opportunity to build a new router cabinet. I have fixed several goals for myself. First, having the top of the router table the same height as the table saw. Second, getting more experience building a cabinet and learning from my mistakes. Third, having less sawdust on the floor. Fourth, having one place to keep all my router bits together, since right now they're all over the place. And finally, using as much wood as possible, because I have too much lying around the house. I have wood in my shop, on the ceiling of the basement living room, at the end of the stairs, underneath some furniture, and also some I use as a bed frame. This doesn't even count the firewood inside the house, and the 5 piles in my backyard. So I start by cutting some thin strips of pine to a more manageable size to make my raised panel. Then I glue all the strips together to make a wider panel. Here you can see some of them drying. When the glue is dry, I scrape off the squeeze out and I cut the panel in two. Now, they can all go through the thickness planner. I make all the sides straight and I reglue the panels together. While the glue is drying, I cut all the pieces for the frames. Before the glue dries completely, I scrape the squeeze out. I route the profiles on all the styles. One nut fell off, so I reglue it with epoxy and clamp it with masking tape. Then I route the rails. I should have done those first, but I sand the panels to remove the glue line in the center. I dry assemble the frames and measure the interior opening. I also measure the depth of the groove. I cut all the raised panels without forgetting to subtract 7/16 to make sure the panel will float inside the frame. When all the panels are cut, I route the raised panels. I start with the end grain, then I continue with the edge grain. I make the profile in several passes. Since the bit I'm using doesn't have a back cutter, I route a rabbet with a bowl bit. I hope that when this is finished, I'll have less sawdust on the floor. I put several rubber barrels inside the groove of the frame to center the panel. I mark the maximum amount of glue I should use, and then glue the grooves and tongues. Now, it's time to assemble the frames. After the panels are inserted into the grooves, it's time to put on some clamps and check for squareness. I add some squeeze out on one corner of the frame, so I put some sawdust on it to soak up the excess. I vacuum the dust and scrape off the rest of the glue. Then I make one groove on the back of each side panel. I use a router plane so my grooves will have a uniform depth. Then I make 2 rabbets on the back panel, which will be inserted into the grooves of the side panels. Obviously, someone who thinks before cutting would have noticed that the rabbits were on the wrong side of the panel. I cut them and redrew them on the right side this time. I do a little fine-tuning with the shoulder plane. I cut a plywood sheet to make all the interior divisions. I cut them with my Poorman track saw and finish them on the table saw. I route a V on one side of the plywood. Then I put an inverse V on a strip of maple. I glue the maple strip on 2 plywood panels, and I'll let this dry all night. The next morning, I cut off the excess maple. I plane the maple that's sticking out so it's flush with the plywood, and I cut the solid maple on the table saw. Then I recut it exactly at the intersection of the plywood. Now it looks like a solid piece of maple instead of a plywood panel. I fine-tuned the pine panels. I marked the thickness of the plywood on the top and bottom of both sides panels. I can see the marking knife line, so I sharpen my pencil and I trace inside the groove. Now, I mark the bottom division of both panels at the same time. I adjust my depth stop for 1/4 of an inch and I make a groove on both panels with a wooden guide. For the top and bottom, I use a router guide. I use a router plane again to be sure of the depth of the groove. I cut some narrow pieces of plywood for the top panel, which will have a hole for the router. I mark the places where I'll make the biscuit slots to reinforce the plywood butt joint. As you can see, I can't be more crooked than that with my biscuit cutter. I put glue on the plywood and inside the biscuit slots. But when I try to clamp that, the crooked biscuits push the plywood up. I'm forced to clamp them on my workbench. I dry assemble the sides and I measure the width of the plywood panels. I make a rabbit that will go inside the pine panel's groove. If you look closely, you can see my rip fence moving, though I didn't notice it at the time. I make all my rabbits like this. I clean up the plywood with a shoulder plane and I remove the front part of the rabbit so they can fit inside the stub groove of the pine panels. It's only after dry clamping the plywood panels that I ask myself, what did I do wrong? Now I jump at making the groove on the vertical separator of the cabinet. If you didn't see the fence moving before, now you can. The groove looks awful, so I need to fill it with a piece of wood. When the glue is dry, I plane it flush with the plywood. I redo the groove and I say to myself, now everything is fine. I fixed my rip fence problem. But no, it's moving again. Another panel to repair. Now I need to find the problem and fix it. I tighten the rip fence guide and I remake it straight along its length. Now I test it. Finally, it's not moving. The table saw moves instead. After that, I make all the grooves on all the pieces. Again, I use a router plane. I measure the size of the interior separator and cut 2 of them. I cut a small notch at the end of the separators because I made stop grooves with the router. I put a chamfer on the corners of the plywood panel so they will be easier to assemble. That's when I noticed that I cut the wrong side on one panel. So I cut a piece of maple and glue it. My plywood router bit was too small. I need to make the groove wider. Once all my grooves are okay, it's time to start sanding the plywood panels. The panels are ready for glue up, so I glue the top parts of the cabinet. I put this inside the pine panels, which aren't glued to anything. They're just used to align it out. Then I glue the bottom parts inside the cabinet. I clamp everything and I let it dry. The next morning, I glue the pine panels and the inside plywood together. I wasn't prepared for this glue up, so I had to ask my lovely wife for help. Now that the cabinet is all glued up, I can start working on the drawers. I'm using old oak hardwood flooring. After cutting the tongues and grooves, I glue the boards together to make wider panels. When the glue is dry, I pass all of them through the thickness planner to have two straight faces. I make one side of the panels straight on the jointer and I cut them for the side drawers. I adjust the fingers of my dovetail jig. I insert a drawer side and I route the half-blind dovetail. I cut the drawer sides to length and then cut the front of the drawers. I insert the drawer side and I route the half-blind dovetails.